This is the most important part of being live, is the coffee in the morning.
Amen to that. Aloha, this is Jim the Traveler with Adrian Hugh.
Yeah, thank you.
And as the title said, Andre Loy. And take it away, Adrian.
Aloha and welcome. This is our breakfast talk story with Andre Loy, and this is a continuation of last night's conversation. So last night, Andre gave us a fantastic presentation about the myths and truths of pesticides. He broke down for us just a few of the arguments that are used to sell pesticides, and then what he sees on the ground and what's in the literature about what they do to our health, and particularly to our children's health, because we know that there's an increasing incidence of several diseases. You name it, everything from seizures and autism to cancer and death. So with that, we're going to really just have a little bit more of a discussion with Andre today. I'm going to lead in with a few questions, and then I'll open it up to everybody else who's in the room. So Andre, tell us a little bit, give us a little bit of your backstory. Like, how did you get into this, and why are you so passionate about it?
Okay, in terms of how I got into farming or organic farming, I come from a farming family. I've been a chronic asthmatic since I've been a baby, and so I would always get very sick if we went anywhere near the sheds with the chemicals, or where the wheat was stored, and I would end up seriously ill. So I was always going to be an organic farmer because I could not use the chemicals. But I became a tropical organic farmer because when I was 17 I visited one of the first pioneering organic farms in Australia, and this is in an area much like here in the Big Island. It's a wet tropical rainforest area. It's a bit over 1,000 feet, and you went through a driveway through the rainforest into this small farm. It's just a few acres, but when I walked on it, I could see all different types of fruit trees I've never seen before, lots of different flowering plants, vegetables, and to me it just looked like the Garden of Eden, because the first time I saw things like jackfruits and custard apples and papayas and bananas, and then all the different tropical flowers, all the different vegetables, both the common ones that we eat, but all the tropical vegetables. Never seen anything like it, and I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. So that's why I got into it, and that's why my farming is tropical. I've been doing that since 1971.
And so then, did you start to notice any changes in your health when you got into that environment?
It was a huge change. As a child, I used to spend, on average, 3 days a week in bed.
Whoa.
I was that ill. And when I moved up to where I am now, my health changed dramatically. That didn't mean it was a cure, and there's still times when I ended up in hospital with bronchopneumonia and these sorts of issues, but it was completely manageable. And the amount of time I was ill was reduced considerably, to say down to 2% compared to what it was when I was younger. So for me, like you say, there's no going back. It was a positive lifestyle change, and it always meant that I'd have to grow these crops without using chemicals. And first I was told it was impossible. My wife and I, we raised a family. We raised our 2 boys on a farm, and I always tell my boys to go for your dreams and don't let people tell you it's impossible, because they grew up on the impossible farm. I was first told, because I was the person who introduced things like rambutans, durians, mangosteens to Australia. In fact, talking about that friend of mine, Tololok. My wife and I, we were on one of our collecting trips in Asia, bringing these fruits back. We also went to Latin America and collected fruits. We were told we couldn't get them back into Australia because of quarantine. I went and saw the quarantine people, found it wasn't impossible, it was difficult, but difficult for good reason, because they wanted to stop us bringing in pests and diseases. So difficult just means you have to plan better and work it out, so that's what we did. Once I'd done that and shown people how to do it, it actually started a whole wave of people bringing in these new crops into Australia. Then I was told you could never grow these things organically because I'd get fruit flies and all these other pests. Well, I did, and I used to at one point export to most cities in Australia and to Japan, into China, Hong Kong, Vancouver, London, Paris. So, yes, I could do it, and I could get the quantities and quality. Because the other thing I was told, also because of where I was 1,000 miles away from the nearest state capital city, that I was too far away from markets. And the fact is, I couldn't find the markets.
So then, when did you start becoming more of an activist and involved with iPhone, for example?
Well, that actually happened. Actually, talking about invasive species, we had a new species of fruit fly came into Australia from Asia, and at that point, my farm was. It's a struggle having a farm, but I got to the point where I had eight full-time workers. And finally doing well and making a profit. And then suddenly we were quarantined, and the only way I could get my fruit out was if I dipped it in 2 organophosphate chemicals, either dimethoate or phenthine. And that's a really difficult thing, because I was an organic farmer I could say, one because of my health, but the other one because of principles. But then I thought, well, do I go bankrupt over my principles? So I want to look at the science and understand that, really, if these things are as safe as what I'm told, then maybe, I'll have to do this so I can sell fruit. So I looked at the science, and that's actually what got me started on writing about it. Because when I started looking at independent peer-reviewed papers, I was absolutely horrified. It was far worse than I ever imagined. And I always remember that after reading that, I had to go down to where we're doing the packing, and I had to sack 8 people. And, and when you're living in a country town, those 8 people, they don't just your employees, they're your neighbours, they're your friends. But I could not sell fruit. I had no income now, and I had to make a really, strong decision, and that set me back 2 years. But then I decided to fight it, and with the science, and in the end, we actually changed the way quarantine works, and to the point where no longer were they doing things like pepper spraying, dipping things in toxic chemicals. We got the science done so we could look at other ways that we could control the pests, particularly things like baiting, ways where we didn't damage the environment. We looked at other ways of how we could treat the produce or make sure that it wasn't infected. In most cases, what we called a hard green protocol, where we actually had a picking protocol for most of it, that at a stage where it would not get stung by the pest, but it was at a quality that would be ripen up and be good to eat at the markets. So for a lot of fruits, bananas and other ones, we could do that. Then some fruits, what we did instead is just have a bait spray program where we actually used a lure with a insecticide that was allowed under organic certification. We didn't spray that on the fruit, we put it on the trunk of the tree. Or we had enclosed baits, that was another one. And so as a result of that, we actually changed the way we deal with these protocols. In fact, I've still got that seat on the committee that deals now with all the exotic pests that come in, because Australia's like Hawaii. We're an island. We're trying to keep things out, but the nature of commercial trade is that they come in, and so. But now we've got protocols of dealing with it so that organic farmers don't have to go out of business. And also, can I say, I actually lost quite a few of my friends to cancer, because they were dipping the stuff originally in their hands and no masks, anything like that. And I was the one that actually got those protocols in, but the damage was done. And quite a few people after that developed cancers, and the type of cancers that you see in the literature with those chemicals.
Right, and last night you talked about some of the chemicals that are actually used in chemical warfare and transferred to plants, and somehow that's now perfectly safe for consumption.
Well, those two particular chemicals used against fruit fly of that same group, the organophosphate, and they're still used. I think actually one of them, the United States, you banned xanthine. My country hasn't banned it yet. In Australia, we use 80 pesticides that are banned in the rest of the world. We're actually the second worst country in the world for pesticide use. India is the worst. Indonesia, for instance, or Guatemala are better than us. We're going to put things in perspective.
Well, America has banned some of them, but then we send them overseas.
Right, and then we import those foods back with the stuff on it.
Yeah. We must think that the third world is much stronger than us by exporting them to this country.
But Thailand is one of the worst.
Oh, yeah.
One of the worst. And yet they claim they don't allow GMO. We were just in a vineyard. They had all BT grapes. They talk about it in literature, but just because it doesn't say GMO, they're not banning it.
Yeah, same with papayas. But it's all their papayas now, a GM papaya.
Well, they have to.
In the world?
No, Hawaii.
Oh, right.
But Thailand, claims that they have no GMOs in the country.
No.
We were just there. But like I said, they had BT grapes. So they don't use pesticides, though. So it's very lucrative for them to say.
Yeah, we'll see. I've yet to see one BT crop where they don't use pesticides, because the nature of BT, you might control one pest, but there's other ones, another group of them that were previously controlled by the spray regime now, which comes out stronger. So it's, and then the other thing we're finding everywhere in the world now is that the pests like bollworm are becoming resistant to BT. So what they're doing is making things like triple stack BTs, where they're putting new types of BT into it. But essentially, it'll be a short-lived technology. It's the same with Roundup Ready now. Roundup Ready is basically failing in the Midwest because of weeds becoming resistant to it. There's what's the name? The giant pigweed. There's a few of them now. The weeds that they've got, so the names will come to me, but they actually grow taller than the corn and pull it down.
Oh, jeez.
So as a result, farmers are having to use other pesticides. And of course, Monsanto won't exist today. Bayer and DuPont and others are trying to bring in new ones that use dicamba, and that is causing huge problems with drift, and another one with 2,4-D. and these particular herbicides drift for miles, and now you have neighbour suing neighbour over damage with these new ones. So it's it's a very interesting field to see what's happening now in the Midwest with the BT and the herbicide-resistant traits. On the other hand, you know, what the companies are actually pushing it in Latin America, but now Latin America is starting to get those problems, and now the big place where they're pushing them out now is Africa, because there's no weed resistant yet or pest resistance to it. In India, the two main ones that they've put out that are use BT varieties are cotton and the eggplant they call brinjal, and massive problems with those, and crop failure, and causing thousands of farmers to commit suicide because they're going to debt to buy the seeds and the chemicals they need, and then they don't have the debt, and so they actually mostly just swallow the poison and leave whole families destitute.
So I just want to touch on the Indian deaths, because there are, let's say, rumors that's not true. And I've talked to some Indian farmers, farmers, and they tell me they see this in the papers every day.
Okay, I can tell you, I have been to the villages, I have met the women and children. It's devastating communities, and we're not talking about an odd suicide here or there. We're talking about an epidemic of thousands, and every month, hundreds of thousands over the years. Yeah. I know that they try to downplay it, but I can also show you the data has been done. If you want to see where the hot spots of suicide are, that's where the BT cotton is growing.
So who are these jokers who are saying that it's not happening? I mean, I've seen these videos of Indian guys saying, "Oh no, it's nothing to see here. There's nothing going on." Who are these people?
Well, that's I'll just say, playing speed doctors trying to play it down, but it is a massive problem in India at the moment. There's basically pretty well stocked BT cotton. I'm in the process of stocking it.
Yep. Go on.
They've basically, for a start, they've actually taken away Monsanto's right to have a patent over it, so Monsanto can't charge any royalties. But this year in particular, the crop failed so badly. It's not even controlling the bollworm now. It's the cotton ball, and now farmers are going back to where they can get other varieties. The big problem is actually getting the non-GMO seed now.
But there are a number of seed banks in India that are run by NGOs. In regards to your question, there's a woman called Vedanta Shiva, and so she's led the coalition, or she assisted in this coalition and has all the data on suicides.
Well, Vandana is actually a close friend of mine, and
she stayed with us in Australia.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually stay with her in India, and now she's the one that's actually taken me to these villages. I've met these people, and she's the one also who is now distributing the indigenous cotton variety. See, the Monsanto one is actually using American strains of cotton. India has been growing cotton for thousands of years, and they have their own indigenous strains. Now, those ones are largely resistant to pests and diseases. So, I've been in Maharashtra state and other places and walked on these fields and seen, wonderful crops, no damage or virtually no damage to the bolls. and then you see the nearby BT fields, and you can just see the damage. And so, yeah, but you're right. Vandana Shiva's the one who's actually led the charge, but now you've actually got all these different grower groups now, basically taking control and trying now just to grow the Indian varieties.
So, actually, I want to back up a little bit because you were talking about organophosphates, and forgive me, I can't recall if we ever talked about this on the podcast. What do you know about the mad cow scare of, was it early 90s, late 80s, somewhere in there? And because my understanding from, I had gone to a conference where Mark Purdy, who's now deceased, so, and he was the head of, I guess, the Cattlemen's Association there in the UK, and organic cattlemen's, and he and his fellow farmers, they refused to use the organophosphates to kill the warble fly, and then basically all the herds that did not use the organophosphates were perfectly fine. The other ones got the mad cow. So the whole thing about cows eating cows is kind of out the window when you look at it that way.
Yeah, although not accurate. Mark was part right with this.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're right, but not one organic farm had mad cow disease. But what actually happened was because of prions and the feed at the time, because they would actually eating cow, but other animal meats as a protein source, and this was cooked, supposedly cooked at a temperature that would make it sterile, but it wasn't enough to destroy prions.
Gotcha.
And so that was the other side of it, is that feed was also what really caused it. So now, by essentially prohibiting animals to eat not just their own species, but how can you say, mammals shouldn't be, in this case,
they're
herbivores.
Exactly.
Well, in this case, not eating other, closely related mammals. That has stopped or significantly reduced mad cow disease, but it how do you say, hasn't stopped it totally. Every now and then there are still examples of it found.
I have a friend whose dad died of a variation of mad cow where he'd eaten meat many years before, and as an older man his health deteriorated and it took over his brain and killed him, and my friend seemed like the doctors were sure it was had to do with the mad cow style of disease. Have you heard of something like that?
Yeah, well, it's in humans. It's and it's the same thing.
And the one in PNG as well.
Yeah, that's from humans eating humans.
It's like Sweeney Todd.
But the same thing. So these prions, they're an interesting thing actually, because in some ways they act like they're alive. They actually multiply, build copies of themselves. What they're doing when they get into the brain is they're actually killing neural cells and grabbing the DNA and building copies of themselves. So that's why the brain ends up with those holes in it, and why it's called mad cow disease. But they're not actually alive. They're not but it's where they're very interesting is actually shows you how life develops from organic molecules. That these organic molecules have the ability to replicate, which is one of the how can you say, criteria for life.
Right.
But what also talk about in Mark Purdy's case, what it also does look like, and this is why a significant difference between the organic cattle and the other cattle in the UK is that the organophosphates do weaken the immune system. So, there is evidence that has actually made the cows more susceptible to the prions. So,
And then he also found a connection with manganese.
He actually did a lot of work.
And he went around the world, and I
Yeah.
know that scrapie cases in the Midwest.
Yeah.
He'd seen some things in, I want to say, Prague and Japan as well, where this like hypersupplementation of manganese seemed to be at play in a lot of different species.
Actually did a lot of work and actually found a range of contributing factors, which I think is very useful, because I think one of the things we have to be very careful of sometimes when we look at something like this and just make the solution just too simple. Is usually we find these things can have a range of contributing factors, and that's what Mark's work uses. And it's very good.
On that big picture, we know the human now is a microbiome. We know that there's more other cells than human cells, right? And we know that the more variety, the more we support the variety, the stronger and healthier we are. And now it's the same exact thing with our soil. So that's what we're saying is we can't go killing off or blasting and radiating the whole soil and expecting to have healthy plants. And like you point out over and over, the organic farms, the multi-diverse farms are showing bigger crops, are showing better crops. And so we're at that place of, well, what are we going to support? Corporation or multi-diversity of our biome?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I like that you said last time I had interviewed you, where you talk about organic farming being the feel-good story of farming. And you touched on this before, because you're able to hire people and provide jobs for, in your case, your neighbors, and to really have a more harmonious impact on the land.
Look, and we have good evidence of that, and that in terms of the environmental impact, you'll find the highest biodiversity on organic farms at every level, from the soil upwards. In fact, the soil is actually the starting point of biodiversity on our planet, because a teaspoon of good soil will have billions of species in it. It's the most biodiverse part. And actually, in the soil, the most biodiverse part of it is actually around the root. There's a word for that now, the rhizosphere. And that's where most of the biodiversity is. And that biodiversity is usually what protects plants. For a lot of the nutrients, like phosphorus, potassium, there'll be fungi that will be attached to the roots, and they would exchange in return for getting glucose or sugars from the plants. Plants' photosynthesis, they'll supply basic minerals. We also know that most of this biodiversity actually protects plants from the pathogens, the invaders. And generally the rule is the more you have around the root, the less that you can be attacked. And the best analogy of that is, if you want to think about a car park, and if you have that car park full of good guys and good girls, there's nowhere for bad people to park.
The ruffians.
Yeah, exactly. But you start putting poisons in and killing them and opening up spaces, well, now you're allowing, the bad people to park there. And in many cases, this is the thing, when you talk about a teaspoon of good soil having billions of life forms, we know in some farms, in say some of the old sugarcane farms where I live, you go down to hundreds of species. And most of those species, or a high percentage of them, are actually pathogens, not the beneficials. You've actually, by continuous use of poisoning, you actually kill most of the good ones, and the other ones that survive tend to be the pathogens. So we also know, and the work's being done now, that we can restore those soils, and quite quickly you can actually reverse the diseases. That's why I wanted to show you, last night I showed the picture in Ethiopia. We actually have a lot of evidence like that now, just showing that the first thing to do with dealing with pests diseases and weeds is fixing up the soil. And people say, oh, how does that work with weeds? Well, with a whole lot of pests, when people are first transitioning to organic, we actually say to people, don't worry too much about it, because 3, 4, 5 years down, it takes that long for these systems to come back. But generally, especially by about year 7, suddenly most of these things just don't exist anymore. And the few that you've got left are really easy to manage when you set up the right system.
And sometimes it would be symbiotic relationships where it's actually beneficial.
Exactly. And that's I didn't really have the time to show it last night, but that's exactly what you want to set up. The word we're using now is functional biodiversity, where rather than the standard model of industrial agriculture is that you only have the crop and anything else in there is a weed, and you need to get rid of it. Whereas what we're looking now is actually planting other species with our crops, and they do turn out to be symbiotic. And we have such good data now showing how we get higher yields. One of the things, for instance, they tend to be more resistant to drought. These systems, they're also more resistant to damaging rains, because if you've got your soil always covered, you're stopping the rains from eroding it. And particularly where I live, the same here, when we get our monsoonal downpours, and these are the nights when we can get 4, 5, 6 inches in a night, and that can be very destructive rain. By having tall ground covers, they get the first of the heavy drops, and then as it goes down to the soil, the other plants help slow it down. And if some soil starts to dislodge and erode, the other plants work as silk traps. You actually see how it conserves the soil. So, these plants, instead of, when people say, oh, they're reducing fertility, no, they're not. The other thing for me that's very important in a high rainfall area, the rain, if you've got bare soil, rain can leach nutrients. That's most of the fertilizers. But if we're growing a lot of plants, then they actually take up all that nutrient and store it in the plant. And then when the dry season comes, or the cool season, and we usually cut them down as mulch and cover the soil, now I've got all those nutrients, on top of the soil, protecting the soil. And so it's these sorts of systems, where we use the word functional biodiversity. What we want now, instead of paying for inputs, we actually bring in biodiversity that gives us our ecosystem services. So I wanted to show you the flowers last night, how we can do that to control pests. We can use compost, and there's a whole range of things that we can use to control pathogens. And there's other plants that we can actually use to control weeds. The ones that we regard as we don't want, we actually replace them with the beneficial ones. That's the car park theory again. If you have bare soil, weeds love it. Weeds generally are what we call pioneer species that come up. If we can outcompete them, for instance, one of my favourites for outcompeting is pinto peanut, creeping peanut. You have it here. And we'll actually mix in other species with it. As a result, in my farm, what were originally my worst weeds now are pretty well disappeared. I'm not going to say I've eradicated them totally, but they are, the word I use is managed. I want to talk Australia-wide, where we're talking that the government's spending hundreds of millions of dollars on herbicides, and nothing's been eradicated.
One thing the Rodeo did at one point was to look at Fukuoka in a one-star revolution, where he has so many different plants and mulch that he controls weeds just by this multi-terrace tiering of plants, and the same with the Chinese system. They have so many different ones growing all in the same place, and they mature at different times.
The traditional, and you can still see those. But
Small crops.
yeah, Fukuoka, One Straw Revolution is a book really worth reading. In terms of how he sets out the principles and how you can use that to very effectively manage weeds. So the word which we're using now is management, and a range of management strategies.
That's what capitalists use.
Sorry?
That's what capitalists use.
We're a capitalist country.
Yeah.
We're a fascist country.
Well, now we are.
Yeah. But, and look, it depends on your system. And I haven't really got the time tonight today to actually go through these and explain how to do it. But generally, we can look at weeds and design, what we call the longer term solution to manage them. But the short term, for instance, we talk about acetic acid or vinegar. Vinegar's 9% acetic acid at 9% strength. There's good work done by the USDA that shows that'll burn down everything.
Including the soil, though. Then we have acidic soil, right?
No, that's just the thing with acetic acid. It actually breaks down. It won't increase. This is actually interesting. It won't actually increase soil acidity. It just decomposes in essentially hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. I know people say that, but we've actually looked at that and found that it just breaks down. It biodegrades rapidly. It's vinegar, that we have. The only thing with that, it's not a systemic herbicide. It's not a poison, so it requires further applications, because what will happen is that most plants will shoot again. But generally speaking, you let them shoot again, and you actually try to get them, but where possible before they go green with chlorophyll, what we call the white stage. And then you can actually spray it with 3% or less, and that burns it down. And you have to do that enough times so that the weed uses its stored carbohydrate and grows up. It never gets a chance to photosynthesize and make more carbohydrates. And so you can kill all weeds on that level. The other issue are seed banks, and some of these invasive species seeds, we have, they're viable for 50 years, hard coats. And what we've found with those, I know some people say you spray them with pre-emergence, but all pre-emergence do is slow down the germinating, but it means if those seeds are viable for 50 years, you still have to spray pre-emergence for 50 years if that's your strategy.
What's pre-emergent?
They stop seeds from germinating. That's why they call it pre-emergent. In other words, it stops, basically if you plow, as soon as you plow soil or open it up, let light in, seeds, that's a signal for seeds to germinate. So a pre-emergent is usually sprayed to actually prevent seeds from germinating, but doesn't kill seeds. That weed load is still there. If they start to germinate, they get poisoned. Best way to say it. What we've found is the long-term strategy for most of these is actually introducing other covers to stop them from germinating. What causes, the main things that will cause seeds to germinate is when you disturb soil and allow light in. If that soil is covered with other plants and doesn't get disturbed, those weeds, those seeds won't germinate, and over time they just decompose and disappear. And we've had great success with that. Another one area where we've had success with quite a lot of our invasive species, things like sensitive weed, a mimosa that you touch, and it'll come up in the lawns in school, in kids' playgrounds, and they're always out spraying with Roundup. That actually has a seed that lasts for 50 years, like a lot of mimosas do. And we've just changed the pH. The two things that actually it's an indication of is acidic soils, but also low nitrogen. And so by adding in a friendlier legume like pinto peanut, well, there's a whole range of them, to put the nitrogen in, and then by actually just putting agricultural lime on it, it disappears in a season.
But lime is, you have to apply and apply and apply and apply to have anything. Believe me, I did lime for years in Virginia to try to help the soil, and it's 10 and 15 years before that actually affects.
With mimosa, we've done it in we do it in one season. I can show you. Actually, I can show you in 3 months. We can get rid of it by liming it.
Yeah.
Get back to this word management, and in our systems where we look at how we bring in functional biodiversity to give us ecosystem services, they start doing most of the work. I get people saying, "Who's looking after your farm at the moment?" Okay, and it's looking after itself. When I'm home, I'm doing work. I'm out in the tractor, but when I first had that farm, this particular one in 1991, I spent my life on the tractor. I spent my life getting irrigation working and so on. I had no time to go anywhere, holidays, nothing. I worked my butt off. But, and that's when you start thinking, you got to start thinking smarter and looking at how to redesign it.
That's right.
And that's what I've done. And so I now have, the word I'll use for this is agroecology. Let's look at the science of ecology and apply it. And actually, I learned a lot actually from here in the States. Going to places like UC Davis and meeting. This is where I started to learn about insectaries. A lot of that work is done. Cornell, Rodale Institute. I learned so much coming to the States, but also to other countries. I'd actually go to the universities, read the papers. I'd actually want to meet these professors or these researchers. And
Did you read Pimentel?
Sorry?
Did you read Pimentel?
Yeah.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, David Pimentel. But
Yeah.
I cite him a lot.
Yeah.
I actually cited him
He's
last
my guru.
night. Yeah. And Professor David Pimentel from Cornell. And then, I redesigned my system. I have a very productive farm. I don't do it now because I'm away, but I used to export all around the world. I still do a lot of exports to Japan. And
What's your yield? I'm just curious.
Sorry?
What's your yield? How many, let's do that. How many people are you feeding?
Okay.
You know what I mean? Let's put
in
those
my
words.
industry, okay?
Yeah, in your industry.
Okay, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Half my farm, 15 acres, are lychees. And, I was for a while the only organic grower in a group. We had over 60 growers along the Australian coast, 62,000 miles. I was the most northerly one in Australia, down to Coffs Harbour, the most southerly one. And we marketed it together in the same box. I didn't put organic on mine, but we had to meet quality control. And at one point, I was the president of this group. And, so because of the way we had strict quality control to get the quality, we used to have to, we had a 3 strikes and you're out with growers. If first time if a grower couldn't meet the quality then those of us, and I was a master grower, we'd go around and have a look at their system, help them do it. If the second time we find a non-compliance, because we audit our material, audit the crops before they went off, the boxes before they went off to markets, we found a non-compliance, we'd go around and again, and this is us in our picking season when we're busy, but we'd give our time to help these other growers and look at their system again, make sure they got it right. Third time, they're out because we know by then that these people aren't serious. So as president, I'd have to ask people to leave or sack them. Basically, as the only organic grower, I had to meet the quality controls. But when I was president, I also had all the yield data from every grower, and to my surprise, I was in the top echelon of growers in terms of yield. And I know that with my other crops, and yield is something that's seasonal and it's not, predictable. But and particularly something like this, which tends to, a lot of tropical fruits tend to be biannual. You have on years and off years. But I know for a fact that my yields were up there with the best, and my quality was up there with the best of my colleagues. So the answer is you can do it, but the big difference was my cost of production was significantly less than my colleagues, because now, by putting in these ecosystem services and getting them to do the work meant that my time the amount of time I have to spend on the farm is significantly less. Instead of spending virtually every waking hour on it, I'm spending more time away from it than in it. And the place is still highly productive. Say here is this is one of the things I specialise in, is teaching these farmers how to make their businesses economic. So it's one thing. Most farmers are good at growing, but most of them are really shit at selling and making money.
Yes.
And so, you're right.
And there's added value.
Yeah.
Because if they take the product and put added value on it, then they're going to see a big difference.
Yeah. So one of the things that I teach, I teach farmers all around the world, and to me one of the most important is selling, marketing, because growing costs you money. The only time you make money is when you sell, and you've got to change that mindset.
That's right.
Work from the market backwards, and start looking at the system. Look, I did this with my farm. I'm one of the pioneers of bringing exotic tropical fruits in Australia. On my farm, I have more than 100 species of tropical fruits. And one time I looked at it and I realised there's 5 of them that made me good money, and the other ones, I sort of broke even on. I was doing the same amount of work. So I just then redesigned, I looked at where I made my money. For instance, with lychees. When I came in early in the season, that's when I got my highest price. Later in the season, the price dropped, but I was doing the same amount of work. So I regrafted my trees to have the early one. You start looking at, and the same thing. So I went down from maybe sending off 30 different types of fruits to 5. I made it seasonal. At one point I was, if you're doing papayas and bananas, you're picking and packing every day, and it meant you never got a life actually. And so then in the end I said, I want things that are seasonal, so I'm only picking and packing for half the year. The other half I can maintain the farm or actually have a holiday. And I made more money. And I suppose this is the thing that we actually need to start teaching. And this is not just organic farmers; it's all farmers. It's not unique to.
That's right.
We've actually got to teach farmers that you're a business. It might be a lifestyle, and you love the lifestyle, but you're a business and you have to look at it as a business. And I can tell you what, you turn it into a good business that makes you money, you'll love the lifestyle even more. And that's what we have to do.
And this I would love you to come from.
I think there's a lot of people in every industry that's like that. Artists are like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a lot of people
Musicians.
don't. Right, exactly. So like a lot of people will. They want to do their craft. They want to get out in front of a big audience. They don't want to do what it takes to bridge that gap.
Now, what we will do is when you're certifying that farm, is test the soil and test the produce. Because this is a really important issue. Now, if you have a look at the certification, there are certain levels that you cannot go over. Look, in this day and age, you cannot say zero because of the nature of all these chemicals that are just basically. But generally speaking, the levels are usually 100% lower than the MRLs or what is normally permitted. But the other thing, what we find is that if people are using the right management techniques, that many of these chemicals will break down, and this includes PCBs, the organochlorines, and we will actually see that they'll be microbially degraded. Now, things like heavy metals like arsenic, cadmium, lead, which you can find in soils. If you build up the soil organic matter, what happens is these chemicals actually absorbed or attach to the organic matter, and the plants have this ability called ion exchange to extract what they need. So where the levels are what we call borderline, what we do now is test the produce. End of the day, what we're interested in is making sure that we don't have these levels in the produce, and more often than not when we test the produce it won't be there. If it's as simple as that. So the certification process is quite rigorous when it comes to allowing a farm to get the USDA. The big trouble with GMOs is because of the way that the pollen drifts. And I know also, talking with labs and stuff that do the work, in some areas in the Midwest, it's hard to find anything below, say 15% tolerance. And for instance, the non-GMO project, they allow up to 5% tolerance because they actually believe that the people who put that together, that if they had zero tolerance, they'd actually have nothing. Yeah.
So, what I want to know, because we're coming up on 10 o'clock. We were supposed to end at 9, but we started late. What I want to know is what practical things, like you talked about, your pioneering work at the outset, how you got started, how you became an activist, the things that you've been able to achieve, bringing in things that were forbidden in your area. What do you think are some of the things that people can start to explore to start making that shift? Some, farmers, consumers. Okay. Where do we begin?
Let's start with the soil. And the two things that make the difference. One is increasing soil organic matter. In other words, putting in compost. I can't speak highly enough of using compost to improve the health and also your yield. And it doesn't matter how big or how small your property is, you can do it. For instance, if you want to talk about some of the farms in the Midwest or in my country where we're talking about thousands of acres, they say, we can't put compost on thousands of acres. Well, what they can do is when they're seeding is actually put the compost next to the seed. In other words, get the biology right next to it. And we had the data as little as 50 pounds an acre gives of compost will give a significant yield response, and you keep on doing it year after year. You improve your system. The other one I think is very important is doing a complete soil test and balancing the nutrients. In conventional industrial agriculture, they just look at nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. But plants need between 22 to 32 different nutrients. And what we like to do is actually do a complete soil test and look at replacing all the nutrients. For instance, what you would find here in the wetter parts of the island is that nearly all these soils will be deficient in boron. When you have high rainfall areas, boron leaches out. But just to explain the importance of boron, actually the other really important one is calcium. And the role calcium has many roles in plants, but its main one of its main roles, it's the word that uses the trucker of minerals. So all the other trace elements, calcium is the one who actually trucks it into the cells, all the other nutrients. So if you don't have enough calcium, it doesn't matter how many of the other nutrients are in the soil, it can't be taken up through the plant and used. So we want to make sure that the calcium levels are good. But
So was that bone meal?
bone meal or just ground
shells or oyster shells.
oyster shells, yeah. But yeah, just ground coral, old coral, limestone,
They use bone too.
bones, exactly, bone meal, exactly.
Charred bones.
But generally, we just use high calcium lime. That's cheap enough. But there's so many sources of calcium, and that's one of the things we teach people. These things, there's so many sources that you can actually find ways to get it very, very cheaply. But the thing is with calcium, it needs boron in the soil for calcium to go into the plant. So in the end, you might have enough calcium, you might have enough other minerals, but if you don't have enough boron, you can't get the calcium to work. And the amount of boron you need is just parts per million. You're really talking about a few spoonfuls per acre.
Wow.
It's
But distributed, how do you do
normally what I do is mix it up in water and just spray it out lightly. And just do it evenly, and the thing is, if you start putting too much boron on, like you want to talk about a really good herbicide, you want to get rid of kikuyu grass or anything, spray it with borax.
Serious?
I'm serious.
What kind of dilution?
You won't need much.
Because that's the huge fight. It's
Your
just a huge
kikuyu
fight.
is so strong.
I know, it's incredibly strong.
Bring my goats by.
Yeah.
Goats eat.
Look,
Just about.
you should just try it one day. Just get some borax at the chemist. Say, mix it up at, say, how can you say, just,
Or just make a water spray again.
yeah, make a water spray. Well, I'm just trying to think of, just say if you had about this much in a pint, you dissolve it in this much borax in a pint of water, and then just spray it out, on the edge of your garden or the fence line, wherever you don't want it to go, and that kikuyu will start to die.
When I lived in Florida, every once in a while, when we'd end up with fleas in the house on the carpet, because we had dogs, you'd sprinkle borax all over the carpets, and then leave
Yeah,
it for 3
the boric
days.
acid for the ant and roaches?
I was gonna say for roaches, yeah. Well,
Same
is
one.
borax and boric acid the same
Or
thing?
borax is the laundry
The laundry
detergent.
kind,
Yeah, no, borax.
But,
Okay,
but
look,
boric
look.
acid.
Yeah, look, where do you get boric acid, borax, sodium, borate? This comes in all different forms. Essentially, we're talking about boron. So, it's also, like you said, it's really good for bugs. It's actually, I want to talk about getting rid of ants, for instance, like fire ants or whatever.
So yeah, talk about that.
Or termites or whatever.
Yeah.
Bedbugs?
Or cockroaches. Yeah, exactly.
All of those
Oh, and not so much bed bugs.
Bird
They live on. They
Yeah.
live on us. But you know, just we just mix it. I just get say borax or sodium borate, and sugar, half and half,
Yeah.
and then just when I'm making the coffee in the morning, boil up some water. Just put a bit on it and just mix it together and just make it like a paste.
Yeah.
And you know, just put that where you know the ants are or the cockroaches. They'll come out. They'll find it.
Yeah, because they're like sugar.
Yeah. And what you know, when you're talking about getting rid of something like a termite's nest or something like a fire ant's nest, where borax is good, it's a slow poison. So the worker ants, the worker termites get it, they bring it back to the hive, and they all feed on it, including the queen.
The termites too. Okay, because I'm chasing them with orange oil right now.
And then one day they all wake up dead. And that's it.
I
They'll wake up.
And on that note,